used to think the scariest monsters were the ones that lurked in shadows, the things that went bump in the night. Turns out, I was wrong. The real monsters, they look just like you and me. They walk among us, smile at our faces, and then, when you least expect it, they show you their true form. This isn't some made-up tale to get clicks. This is a confession, a warning, and a desperate attempt to exorcise the demons that still haunt me. It started innocently enough, as these things always do. My senior year of high school, I fell in with a new crowd, Mark, Liam, and Chloe. They were charismatic, daring, and just the right amount of rebellious to seem cool. I was a bit of a loner, quiet, and easily impressed. They saw that, and they exploited it. Looking back, I see the red flags now, a whole crimson parade. But then, I was blind. Their tests began subtly. Dares, mostly. Nothing too extreme at first. Shoplifting candy bars, sneaking into the deserted old library after hours. I went along with it, eager to fit in, to finally have a group that accepted me. I remember the rush, the adrenaline, the feeling of belonging that I'd craved for so long. They'd laugh, clap me on the back, and tell me I was a natural. They were building me up meticulously to break me down. The first real chill ran down my spine during a visit to the old abandoned mill. It was a local legend, a place where people said strange things happened. Kids dared each other to go there, but few ever stayed long. Mark, with his unsettling grin, suggested we spend a whole night there. Just us, he'd said, to prove we're not like the others. We arrived just after dusk. The air was thick with the scent of decay and damp concrete. Moonlight barely pierced the grime-streaked windows. The mill was a skeletal structure, rusted machinery looming like petrified beasts. Liam, usually the most boisterous, was unusually quiet. Chloe, her eyes gleaming with a strange excitement, seemed to thrive in the oppressive atmosphere. Around midnight, Mark pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket from his pocket. "My grandmother's," he explained, his voice low. She said it held a piece of her soul. She swore it brought her luck. He then, without a hint of irony or hesitation, produced a small hammer from his bag. "And now," he declared, his voice rising, "we're going to give it a new home." He led us to a dark, recessed corner, where a massive, defunct gear mechanism stood. He pressed the locket into a small crevice in the metal. Then, with a disturbing, almost ritualistic solemnity, brought the hammer down. The locket shattered, scattering fragments of silver onto the grimy floor. A shiver, colder than the night air, snaked its way up my spine. It wasn't just a broken locket. It felt like a broken promise, a desecration. Liam flinched, but Chloe just watched, a faint smile playing on her lips. "To bind us," Mark whispered, his gaze sweeping over us, lingering a moment too long on my face. "Forever." After the mill, the games escalated. They weren't just about petty thrills anymore. They were about control, about seeing how far they could push me. They'd orchestrate elaborate scenarios, always with me as the unwitting victim or the desperate participant. There was the time they convinced me to break into old Mrs. Henderson's house, the neighborhood's notorious recluse, under the guise of retrieving a lost ball. They waited outside snickering, while I tiptoed through the dust-laden silence of her home, my heart hammering against my ribs. I remember the smell of stale air and mothballs, the unsettling feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. When I finally found a deflated football they'd clearly planted and scrambled out, they just laughed, calling me a natural. They didn't care about the ball. They just wanted to see me squirm. Then came the truth or dare nights. Not the innocent kind. These were twisted, designed to expose our deepest fears and insecurities. One night, it was my turn. Chloe, her eyes piercing, dared me to confess my biggest secret. I hesitated, my mind racing. I had a crush on a girl in our class, Sarah, and I'd written her a silly, lovesick poem. It felt incredibly vulnerable, almost sacred. But under their expectant stares, the relentless pressure, I blurted it out. They erupted in laughter. Mark, with a cruel glint in his eye, snatched my phone and sent the poem to Sarah from my account. I watched in horror as the message went through. Sarah never spoke to me again. I hated them, hated myself, but still, I clung to them, desperate for their approval, terrified of being alone. The turning point, the true nightmare, unfolded during our summer break. Mark suggested a camping trip to Elm Creek, a remote, little-known area deep in the woods. He claimed his uncle owned land there, a secluded cabin. The others seemed eager. I was hesitant. The place had a reputation, whispered stories of things that went missing, of strange lights in the trees. But I didn't want to be the coward. The cabin was dilapidated, barely more than a shack, surrounded by a suffocating silence that felt heavier than air. The woods pressed in on all sides, a thick green wall that seemed to watch us. From the moment we arrived, an oppressive unease settled over me. The others, however, seemed invigorated by the isolation. On the second night, after a day of aimless wandering and forced camaraderie, Mark proposed a new game. He called it the sacrifice. My blood ran cold. He explained with a chillingly calm demeanor that one of us would have to spend the night in the old, decaying shed behind the cabin. For good luck, he said, his eyes glinting in the firelight, to appease the spirits of the woods. Liam, visibly uncomfortable, tried to object, but Mark cut him off with a sharp look. Chloe, a strange, almost manic excitement in her eyes, readily agreed. The decision fell to a draw of straws, and of course, the shortest straw landed in my hand. The shed was a decaying tomb, filled with forgotten tools, cobwebs, and the stench of mildew and something else, something metallic and sickly sweet. The single, grimy window offered no comfort, only a distorted view of the encroaching darkness. I huddled in a corner, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, listening to every creak and groan of the old structure. Hours passed. The sounds of the forest outside grew louder, more distinct. Twigs snapping that sounded like footsteps, distant howls that morphed into whispers. My imagination ran wild. I started to hear things inside the shed too. Soft scratching sounds from behind the old wooden crates, a faint, rhythmic thumping that seemed to come from beneath the dirt floor. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was just mice or the wind, but the fear was a living thing coiling in my gut. Around 3 a.m., a new sound began, a low, guttural moan coming from just outside the shed door. It wasn't animal. It was too deep, too ragged. Then came the scratching, insistent and claw-like against the wooden planks of the door. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears silently streaming down my face. "This isn't real," I chanted internally. "They're just messing with me." But then I heard their voices. Mark's low and distinct, then Chloe's, a chilling giggle, followed by Liam's strained murmur. They were outside. They were doing this. They were making those sounds. They were playing with my terror. The scratching stopped, replaced by a dull thud, as if something heavy had been dropped against the door. Then, silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. I stayed huddled, trembling, for what felt like an eternity. When the first rays of dawn finally pierced the grimy window, I crawled out, my limbs stiff with terror, my mind frayed. Mark, Liam, and Chloe were sitting around a still smouldering campfire, looking entirely too refreshed. "Sleep well?" Mark asked, a smirk playing on his lips. Liam avoided my gaze. Chloe just stared at me, a disturbing light in her eyes. I didn't say a word. I just walked past them, into the woods, and vomited. That was the moment I realized. It wasn't just about pranks or dares anymore. It was about something far darker. They enjoyed my fear. They reveled in it. And they were getting bolder, more cruel. The day after the shed incident, as we were packing up to leave, I noticed something. A small, intricately carved wooden figure, no bigger than my thumb, lying half buried in the dirt near the shed. It was a grotesque thing, human-like, with twisted limbs and a gaping mouth. I bent down to pick it up, and that's when I saw it. Engraved on its base, barely visible, were my initials. My blood ran cold. They hadn't just put me in the shed. They had done something to me, something ritualistic. The sacrifice wasn't just a game. It was a dark pact, a twisted offering. I confronted them, my voice shaking. Mark just laughed. "Souvenir," he said, his eyes glinting. Chloe's smile widened, unnatural and chilling. Liam, however, looked genuinely uncomfortable. He pulled me aside later, his voice barely a whisper. "They're different up here, man," he said, his eyes wide with a fear that mirrored my own. Something changed them. He wouldn't elaborate, just shook his head and walked away. The drive back was agonizing. I sat in the back, the wooden figure clutched in my pocket, its silent presence a constant reminder of their malevolence. I felt a growing sense of dread, a premonition of something terrible. When we got back to civilization, I expected things to return to normal, or at least a semblance of it. I was wrong. The air around them felt different. There was a new intensity to their eyes, a predatory glint. They started appearing in places I frequented, not to hang out, but to watch. I'd catch glimpses of Mark standing across the street from my house, Chloe lingering near my bus stop, Liam parked down the road from my school. They didn't approach, they just observed. My dreams became a kaleidoscope of the shed, the scratching, the moans, and their distorted faces. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I could still hear their whispers. I lost weight, my grades plummeted, and I started having panic attacks. My parents were worried, but I couldn't tell them. How do you explain that your friends are actively trying to terrorize you, that they've performed some kind of dark ritual on you? They'd think I was crazy. One night, I was home alone. It was late, past midnight. I was trying to study, but every shadow seemed to dance. Every creak of the house made me jump. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Just a picture. A grainy, blurry photo of me sitting at my desk, looking at my phone. It had been taken from outside my window. A gasp caught in my throat. I stumbled back, knocking over my chair. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. They were here. They were watching me. Then, another text. This one from Mark. "Sleep tight." I threw my phone across the room. I was trapped. They were everywhere. The fear was no longer confined to my mind. It was a physical presence pressing in on me from all sides. The next day, I confronted Liam. He was the weakest link, the one who seemed to still possess a shred of humanity. I found him alone after school, looking haunted. "What do they want?" I hissed, grabbing his arm. "What did you do to me?" His eyes darted around nervously. I don't know," he stammered. "It's Mark. He changed after Elm Creek." He paused, then leaned in, his voice a desperate whisper. "He found something in the woods. It changed him. And Chloe too. They're not themselves anymore." Before I could press him for more, Mark and Chloe appeared, their faces blank, their eyes cold. Liam immediately pulled away from me, his expression hardening. "Everything okay here?" Mark asked, his voice deceptively calm. I stared at them, a sickening realization dawning on me. Liam was just a pawn. They were all pawns. Something truly malevolent had taken root in them, something that went beyond mere cruelty. I knew then that I had to escape, not just from them, but from whatever influence they were under. I couldn't stay in that town, not with their eyes constantly on me. I spent the next few days in a haze of paranoia, making plans. I packed a small bag, withdrew all the money I had saved, and wrote a vague note to my parents, claiming I needed a change of scenery. I knew it was a terrible excuse, but I couldn't think of anything else. The night I left, I crept out of my house under the cloak of darkness, my heart pounding a rhythm of fear and desperation. As I walked down the street towards the bus station, a car slowly pulled up beside me. It was Mark's. He was in the driver's seat, Chloe beside him, her face illuminated by the dim dashboard lights. Neither of them spoke. They just stared, their eyes hollow, like windows to an empty abyss. I broke into a run, my lungs burning, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I reached the bus station, didn't breathe easy until the bus pulled out of town, leaving that nightmare behind. I've been gone for years now. I've rebuilt my life, moved to a different state, changed my number, my identity, everything. But the shadows of Elm Creek, the memory of their hollow eyes, they still linger. I still check my phone obsessively, expecting a text, a picture, a silent message from the unknown. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside my window sends a jolt of fear through me. I never found out what truly happened to Mark and Chloe, what they found in those woods. I never understood why Liam, despite his fear, remained complicit. All I know is that they weren't just bad friends. They were something else, something terrifying. And the scariest part? I don't know if I truly escaped. I don't know if I ever will. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the faint scratching at my door, the low moan from the darkness, and I remember the wooden figure with my initials carved into it, the sacrifice in the shed. I wonder if it wasn't just a game. I wonder if they didn't just break a locket. I wonder if they bound me to something far more sinister, something that still hunts me even now, in the quiet of my new life. And I wonder, are you next? Because sometimes the real monsters aren't under your bed. They're the ones you invite into your life.